We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generations.
Making news just for you. It's March 13th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yun, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Good morning, and Woo Hee-jun.
Happy to be here.
Happy Wednesday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, K-pop girl group Blackpink's member Jisoo has become the latest global brand ambassador for the London-based fashion label Self-Portrait. She is the first musician to have signed up to be the face of this label. Previous representatives include models like Naomi Campbell and Gigi Hadid. The founder and creative director of the UK label said he decided to pick Jisoo because it was inspirational to see her become a global icon and pose as a role model to many around the world. The Korea Tourism Organization has found that the age of visitors coming to South Korea is becoming younger. Among the over 11 million visitors who stepped foot in Korea last year, 35.6% were under the age of 30. To be exact, those aged 21 to 30 were the biggest age group to come to Seoul, taking up around a quarter of all foreign visitors last year. The proportion of young visitors under the age of 30 came up by 8.1 percentage points from 10 years ago. The KTO analyzed this surge to be from the peaking popularity of K-content. And lastly, for the past couple of days, we've been seeing the cryptocurrency Bitcoin reaching new all-time highs. Here in Korea, one Bitcoin topped 100 million won for the first time on Monday. That's around $76,300. Globally, we've seen a unit of Bitcoin surpass the $69,000 mark, the previous record high reached in November of 2021. Now, analysts attributed the recent boost of the digital asset from the upcoming halving event in April, which is when the cryptocurrency production is cut by literally half. Another popular analysis is that there has been a surge since January when the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission approved trading of exchange-traded funds ETF to the spot price of Bitcoin, which allows people to track the value of Bitcoin without owning it. And just before the pandemic, we saw a surge in cryptocurrency prices. The market was hot. But now that this trend has come back, I'd like to ask our panelists if you guys are actually interested in jumping onto this trend. And what do you think about this latest digital asset craze?
Well, the price of Bitcoin, the currency, has been more highest price at the day after day. And investors are increasingly interested and funds are flowing into the market at the highest level ever. And according to the recent report by CoinShare International, the digital asset investment research company, they recorded 2.7 billion flow into the virtual currency from last week, which is most of them were concentrated on the Bitcoins. And however, I'm not really into these digital asset, to be honest, because just feel like it's not for me yet. But it's I'm also quite introverted when it comes with the financial, so I'm kind of more eye-catching on the more stable products.
Stable products for sure. And though we're seeing a rise because during the pandemic we've seen Bitcoin prices fall back down,
Exactly.
I think a lot of people are realizing how volatile the market could be, which is stopping them from investment. But what about you? Where do you stand?
I'm actually very similar to Hee-jun. As I get older, I slowly start to get more interested in investing myself, but I just can't seem to try Bitcoin. I don't know enough about cryptocurrency, and for me to invest, since I know very little, it seems like a very bad idea, to be honest with you. And not only that, I just hear a lot of bad things about Bitcoin, and I don't know if that's just the news that I hear. But for me, from now on, I would rather just try and invest in some safer options, but that's also very hard to do as well.
It's quite fascinating to find out that you two are quite conservative investors, because around me every single day, a lot of my friends who are actually in the cryptocurrency asset investment, they're looking at the headlines, they're showing me every day how it's soaring, but we'll have to see. We'll keep a close eye on the trends. Now, that was our news feed for this Wednesday. Let's switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day now. So last month, the South Korean Constitutional Court overturned a years-long tradition, spreading smiles on the faces of expecting parents. To find out more, take a listen to my AI voice secretary. Parents in Korea will now be able to find out the sex of their born baby before the 2 weeks of pregnancy. Last month, the South Korean Constitutional Court nullified a related law provision. Under the original Medical Act Article 20, doctors who revealed an immature fetus, sex to anyone, including the mother, would have their license suspended and face up to 2 years in prison or a fine of $15,000.
This was a law introduced in 1987 to thwart selective abortions based on parents' preference for sons.
It took nearly 40 years for South Korea to make a groundbreaking decision that follows many other places in the world. As we just heard from my AI voice secretary, parents will now be able to find out the sex of their unborn baby before 32 weeks of pregnancy from doctors without any strings attached. So Walter, why don't you tell us a little bit more about why this law was first practiced here in Korea?
Yes, so if we take a look at the screen, and I will explain a little bit more about this law. So previously in Korea, medical staff were not allowed to tell parents the gender of their baby until the 32nd week of pregnancy, essentially making it too late to get an abortion, and noting that abortion is still a grey area here in Korea. It is illegal, though it's a criminal act. You do not get penalized for it. This comes from a tradition of families in the past wanting to bear a son rather than a daughter. This could be for many reasons, many silly reasons in my opinion, such as to pass the name down. However, in late February, as we mentioned earlier, the Constitutional Court ruled that this law was indeed unconstitutional and therefore lifted the Clause 2 of the Medical Services Act, Article 20, by a 6-3 vote. I just want to say shame on those who decided against that vote for not lifting the ban, in my opinion.
Exactly, and let's now focus on why legislators here have decided to amend this years-long tradition.
Right. Before Article 20 of the medical law was declared unconstitutional, which is the Fetus Gender Reveal Prohibition Acts, the fetus genders families are not should be known before the 32 weeks of the pregnancy. But these days, with the medical technology in these generations, people couldn't know the gender of their baby after only 7 weeks. But the doctor could not tell them openly because of this medical law mentions. But they usually used to know that by indirect expressions by the doctor, because doctor usually look at the ultrasound at the clinic and used to say if the baby is quite dignified if the baby is a son, or pretty if it is a girl. But as that or concept of the pregnancy or the fetus of the gender reveals seems to be more parents' rationale is more kind of emerging now. And as parents of the baby, I'm also quite active proponents for these new amendments, because if I could know my baby's gender as soon as possible, even one more day earlier, I can make more appropriate preparations, I think.
Exactly. I think the gender reveal part is an integral part of the pregnancy. It's such a journey. You get so surprised and happy with no matter what. And as you mentioned, I do think legislators were well aware that though it was against the law for medical staff to be telling you what the gender of your child could be, they did give you so many hints, which is exactly why now that you are a father of a 1-year-old baby, did you receive any hints from your gynecologist as to what the gender would be before 32 weeks into the pregnancy?
Well, not my gynecologist,
Well,
but
yes, your wife.
my wife's gynecologist. So yes, my baby was born before the change to the articles, but they did give us hints. It would be a little embarrassing to say exactly what they said, but it was something to the effect of, oh, this baby does not have any boy parts. So I mean, it didn't really bother me at that. Like before we decided to have a baby, I always said I'd want a daughter, right? But when we found out that my wife was pregnant, I really didn't care about the sex of the baby. I was just more worried about the health of the baby. So therefore, I would have been okay with a son, but I was still praying for a daughter, and I got one, so that was really good. But yes, I was more concerned with the health of the baby. But yes, I agree with what Hee-jun said earlier as well with preparation.
Exactly, and I think your anecdote highlights a very important change from our generation. Before, as we all mentioned, there was a strong preference for sons here in Korea. It was cultural, I think, based on our Confucius roots, and given the fact that we are coming from an agricultural society, a lot of people preferred sons. But nowadays, we're seeing a lot of people from our generation prefer daughters, and the right to know seems to be most key for MZer parents out there. But there's still a lot of legalities regarding this issue, which is exactly why we're going to include an attorney in our talks. Stay tuned for our live interview. We're now going to talk to Hwang Yoongi, a lawyer here in Seoul. Welcome, Yoongi.
Hi, good morning. Great to be back.
All right, Yoongi. So how exactly has the Medical Act been amended, and does the latest amendment ensure all doctors to be exempt from any legal repercussions for revealing the gender of an unborn child before 32 weeks? And in other words, can the doctor tell a parent at the earliest period, which Hee-jun mentioned, is 7 weeks into their pregnancy?
Yes, that's true. So this time the Constitution made a decision to strike down the Medical Act, a provision in the Medical Act. So this decision is a lot more immediate than the one that was in 2008. So this decision is immediate effectively. So from this point on, doctors can tell the parents the gender of their child at whatever stage in the pregnancy.
So it doesn't matter whether they're 32 weeks or 7 weeks. As soon as they find out the fetus's gender, doctors are now no longer tied down to any strings to reveal the gender. Awesome.
And
Great.
are there any similar laws to South Korea's abroad? And what's it like in other parts of the world?
So I'm not an expert on other legal jurisdictions, but from what I've gleaned, there are similar laws in India and China, which are both very strongly patrilineal and society.
Any concern or things we may be overlooking, or don't you think that we need a more strong measure in regard to abortions as well?
So I think the decision by the Constitutional Court this time reflects the changes in societal sentiment that we've had over the couple of decades. Ever since the ban on discernment of genders was introduced in 1987, we've had a number of changes. And I think this really does reflect our changes in thinking, because I'd say if I had to say, there's a slight preference to daughters these days, because it's not easy raising a boy. My parents could tell you that. You should ask them. So yeah, so I think this is a very welcome decision from the Constitutional Court.
I think you mentioned a great point. I think legislators are well aware about the preferences of millennials and Gen Z. Before, while we may have seen a strong preference for sons, as you mentioned, even around me, there seems to be a stronger preference for daughters. Now, thank you so much, Yoongi. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Great, it was a pleasure as well.
All right, and we asked our viewers what they thought about gender disclosure of an unborn fetus, and here's what 3 of them had to say. They've actually incorporated their experience from respective countries. Let's start with Leon. Leon said, "There's no clear legal consensus on fetal sex disclosure in Singapore. While there are no laws explicitly prohibiting it, there are also no regulations that explicitly allow it. In my opinion, the disclosure of fetal sex could raise ethical concerns, such as sex-selective abortions." Giselle says it is legal in the U.S., however, there isn't a cultural push to prefer one sex over the other. If there was a culture to prefer a boy or girl, then revealing the sex beforehand could be problematic. Benny said, "For me, it's allowed to say about it, and there will be good exceptions to think about which gender is the baby." Now, before we end our discussion, and we're going to be talking about the need for stronger measures for abortion, I do want to point out one more point. We've mentioned before constantly that there used to be this strong preference for males, but now we're seeing daughters. And as a father, would you agree that the gender of the baby really matters that much?
So for me personally, like I said, it was all about the health. Didn't really quite matter whether it was going to be a boy or a girl, though like I mentioned earlier, that a girl was the preference. But if I were to find out that it was a male, it wouldn't have bothered me too much. And I think this is what a lot of the people, a lot of the MZ generation are actually in the same mindset of. And if, let's say, they do have a boy and they prefer a girl, a lot of them do go back and try again in getting a girl. So I think that we are definitely changing the traditional norms where, I guess, like I said, sometimes people wanted to put their name forward and let's say having the Kim name passed down because of males. Traditionally, we would pass down the male's name to the child. Actually, for me, I passed down my wife's name to our child. So that was more important for me to do that. But for me, I think it's great that I have a daughter. If I had a son, I would have loved that son just as much. I'm not going to have any more babies, so I'm very happy just with one. But yes, I do agree that in the past, they preferred males, but now I just don't see, amongst all my friends anyway, I don't see them wanting to choose one or the other.
Yeah, it's not a deal breaker. I think we need to make a clear distinction. Just because the gender of the baby is revealed and it might not be to your personal liking, I don't think that's pushing a lot of millennials and Gen Zs into thinking about abortion. Though we can't generalize. Of course, there are exceptional cases, but I do think those are two separate issues. Now, what about you, Heejun? Do you think the gender of a baby is that important?
I don't really think so, because I think that throughout all the topic that I covered, it was like mostly about the gender equality. I think these topics occurred because from the previous generations, they have some kind of like, prejudice and stereotypes about the sex of the baby. But, in these days, they're like breaking barriers about any ability or any job or duties. Every gender, they can do whatever they want under their ability. So I think it's no more biggest topic that we have to concern about in these days.
Exactly. I do think that everyone might have their own personal affinity or a preference, but I don't think it pushes them to thinking about an abortion, which is exactly why I would like to end off by asking about any more room for amendment when it comes to any medical laws or rules regarding a child in birth.
Well, I just also like to add on to the end as well, like also what our attorney said before, that a lot of people are choosing or wanting girls these days because even as a male, I knew what it was like to grow up as a very troublemaking kid, and we are under the assumption that girls are much easier to raise, but we'll see what happens in the next 15 years for me. But yes, to answer your question, I do think that the topic of abortion here needs to be talked about in a more serious tone. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it is illegal, but there's a very gray area at the moment where you can get an abortion and there is no penalty for it, though it's definitely looked down upon still here, very much in a traditional society like Korea. Now, for me, I am a person who speaks on like a woman is able to do what she is wanting with her body, whether it be abortion. And I'm very hard on that, and I think a lot of people are out there who are against it, which I completely understand as well. But I think Korea needs to get out of these traditional norms and start talking about the more modern day normalities of abortion, and that's something that we need to talk about in a serious conversation.
Exactly, because I believe gender disclosure really encapsulates our generation's right to know. I think our generation feels the need, and they think it's a definite right to know, especially when it comes from your personal decision, having a child. It's your child and you might want to know. And I think it really relieves the burden of medical staff out there who used to have that burden of being penalized for letting really eager parents know what the gender of their child would be. And I think these legal amendments are best reflecting our generation's preferences and the cultural nuance change. Now, Heejun, what do you think still needs more work regarding any amendments related to childbirth?
Well, however, even if it's not about the preference for the son, the number of abortions due to the personal reasons has been increasing so far. So in connection with these issues, abortions and also artificial abortion have been partially constitutional in the court, but the bills has not been made yet. So the supplementary registration is quite rush at the moment. The government should maintain the registrations to protect the life of the baby by considering the timing or methods of the gender reveals. And I also personally think that a parent's right to know is quite important, as she mentions, but no more precious than fetus lives, as we know.
Exactly, and I think that's also a very good point, because though our topic today is more focused on the parent's right to know, another similar topic that we cannot not mention is abortion rates, as we keep ending our conversation with that. And just as a fact check, in 2019, the Constitutional Court in Korea has actually decided to make criminalizing abortion unconstitutional. And since then, they've proposed 17 bills for the National Assembly to come together and pass a concrete legal amendment. But we haven't seen any progress yet. That's why abortion rights here in Korea still remain in a very legal gray area. But now, recently, with France constitutionalizing a woman's right to abortion, we've seen the topic resurface, and hopefully today's episode on News Generation could shed light onto the changing trends and the perspectives of childbirth and a right for not only the woman or the parent or for the child, but really highlight what is needed, because at the end of the day, here in abortion in Korea, it's not covered by national health insurance. We're still seeing a lot of cultural nuances as to tabooing it, but I do think it's the reality. Just by banning it does not to put down abortion rates any down. So it's now the time to really reflect our generation's yearning and demand and better appropriate to what they are asking for. And hopefully we'll see some discussions come forth. But in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Walter Lee
Lovely to be here.
and Woo Hee-jun.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.